Hello. So church today was really good. The we were running late this morning, which happens more often than we'd like, but we were running a little bit later than normal. So we got to church, but we got to church right on time. My oldest daughter, who came behind us, forgot that she had a lesson that she was supposed to teach in her young women's class, and so she was rushing to prepare that. I helped her a little bit with that in the morning. But that got her out the door a little bit later, so she came in after the opening hymn. But the opening hymn was "Dearest Children, God is with you," and then Brother Travis, I don't know his last name, gave the opening prayer. And one of the things that he was grateful for was that the Hanks came back from their mission, and so today was a homecoming for the Hanks. But before they gave their talk, they the bishop presented a couple of young people who were recently baptized, as Spencer Walker and Ellie Johnson. And then Sister Hanks gave a talk, and they served a mission. They were called to serve in North Carolina, and they went out to their mission right before COVID hit, and there were all the lockdowns, and a bunch of missionaries had to go home. And they ended up going through 3 different mission presidents. And they didn't go to church in North Carolina because church was locked down. So they ended up attending church virtually here in Utah. And Brother Hanks would do the sacrament in their apartment in North Carolina. And Sister Hanks talked about how she loves church magazines, and she talks about an article from Elder Gong, talks about his kind of pioneer story, and he follows the pioneers through the Sacred Grove and Kirtland and Nauvoo, and he talks about being all into the gospel, and how that's not necessarily the same as being all into the church, but being all into the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that was the main thrust of her talk. Brother Hanks talked about standing in holy places. Talked about how holy places protect us from physical and spiritual dangers. And he talked about various holy places that are in our lives, whether it was church, the temple, our homes can be a holy place. He talked about how a holy place could also be a condition or a set of thoughts or activities. So as you are praying, that can be a holy place. And as you do these things where you're praying or being in a holy place or doing what's right, you can get spiritual and physical protection. He told a story while he was on his mission. He was kind of the vehicle coordinator for all these young missionaries, and the young missionaries had to in their mission, they were supposed to bring a bicycle to the mission. They used bicycles a lot. And then a bunch of missionaries went home during COVID. They had a bunch of extra bicycles in a shed. And then a bunch of missionaries went home for COVID, and several of them said, just keep my bicycle. I'm just going to donate my bicycle to the mission. And so they had a ton of extra bicycles in the shed. And he's like, my goodness, this is just an inefficient system. There's all these bikes in the shed, and we just end up accumulating bikes. But then what ended up happening is missionaries from foreign areas, because of COVID, were transferred to their mission. And so their mission got a lot bigger, and the missionaries from the foreign areas didn't have bicycles, weren't given bicycles. And so he was able to loan out all of those bicycles from the shed, and they almost all got used, he said. And he was just astounded by how well God worked things out, because that wasn't forethought on his part as the vehicle coordinator. It was because he didn't know he was going to get a big influx of foreign missionaries. And he felt like it was the hand of God just working things out through something as simple as bicycles. And it was a testimony to him that God is in charge of things. And we sang "Where Can I Turn for Peace" as the closing hymn. I didn't hear much of the closing prayer because my son Simon was being a little bit distracting and kept on trying to give a toy and talk to his sister. his sister Margot, and so I had to kind of quiet them down. But anyways, they struggled with being reverent, got a little bit in trouble. But we did, after that, we sang Father in Heaven We Do Believe for the sacrament hymn, and we had sacrament, and that was good. Then I went to priesthood session, and we had a excellent priesthood lesson. Brother Crookston led the lesson. It was based on Elder Oak's talk, where he encounters a woman. In the stories, he encounters a woman, and he's talking about Jesus Christ, and the woman asks the question, what has Christ ever done for me? Because she felt like Christ hadn't done a lot for her. And Elder Oaks, in the talk, in the sermon, he talks about different things Christ has done for us in general as humanity. But Brother Crookston invited us to share stories about what Christ has done for us individually. And lots of people talked about very spiritual experiences that they had or that family members had, times when God just was merciful to them. Probably the most dramatic story was there was a story that they were at a family reunion, and the family reunion had a pool, and a young boy almost drowned, and the man telling the story talked about how he gave a blessing to the boy, and right after the blessing, the boy started to breathe. They were also doing CPR and calling an ambulance, but right after that blessing, the boy started to breathe, and for him, it was a testimony that God was kind to him in that instance. And it was a very lots of strong testimonies of how Christ has helped people in their personal lives. It was just a great lesson just for hearing that. The underlying theme, I guess, was Christ's love and forgiveness. Lots of people talking about how one brother talked about how his older brother had been killed in a car accident. And he talked about how he often thought about that and thought about times where God has protected him. He had talked about, well, what if my brother had gone, just a couple seconds later, like gone slower down the stairs and just been seconds later because it was just he was T-boned in an intersection, right? And he said, there have been lots of times where I've noticed that God has protected me and helped me. And I know that there are some cynics who would be like, well, what about his brother? Like, why didn't God protect his brother? But for that man, it made sense. And it worked for him. And it made him, and he knew that God was watching out for him. We talked about how we can kind of act like Christ in talking to friends and mourning with those who mourn and helping those that are struggling, that we can help get people out of jams and soften consequences for people in a merciful way. And we can be willing to forgive, help others have strength. So there was a guy who talks about when he has an employee, he works in construction and he owns a business, and he sometimes has employees who make mistakes, and he has to cover those mistakes with a financial. He needs to go to the client and say, hey, we made this mistake. I'm going to make it right. I'm going to cover this employee's mistake. And to him, that's a reminder of how Christ covers our mistakes and helps us. And he talks to the employee and he says, I want you to learn from this. Like, we'll be okay if you learn from this situation and improve. And he feels like that's kind of the conversation that God has with us, that he wants us to, if we make mistakes, that's okay. And he covers from us. He just wants us to learn from them and improve. Anyways, some good comments where a brother just said something interesting, that Christ really sees us as people. He doesn't see us as slugs. He doesn't see us as these worthless things. He sees us as people, but that stuck out to me. He doesn't see us as slugs. another comment that came up is when we stop our eternal progression, when we stop learning, when we stop trying to get better, is it God damning us, or are we damning ourselves? Just the idea of damnation being self-imposed. It's us refusing to progress and become more Christ-like. Let's see. Another comment that came up was that in the judgment, there's a feeling that a lot of the judgment is going to be what we are willing to accept, and that we will need to, in the face of Christ, be willing to say, yes, I've trusted in you, or I forgive you, or I accept this forgiveness. And there's a comment made that it will be a lot easier to forgive ourselves at the last day if we are forgiving of others today. And so I thought that was a good comment. And then there was another good comment where a guy, he talked about how Christ really has done everything for us. And just that we feel that. And lots of people, you could feel that in this lesson. Lots of people are feeling, Christ has really done everything for us. He's the reason we live. He's forgiven us. He's helped us. He's created us. He has made it so that we can come. And the comment that the guy made was, he's done everything. We're just trying to find ways to express it. And that difficulty, him articulating or highlighting the difficulty, the ineffability of expressing gratitude towards God, expressing what you feel towards God, that resonated with me. Yeah. So that was church. It was really good. I really liked that priesthood meeting that we had, the elders' core meeting.